Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Easy English Story Lab. Today's B2 to C1 level story is called I Joined a Gym. This is not just about fitness. It's about discipline and personal growth. Listen carefully. Pause the video. Repeat after me. Copy the pronunciation, rhythm, and emotion. Let's begin. I never thought I would be the kind of person who joins a gym. For years, I told myself I was too busy, that I could exercise at home, or that I simply wasn't interested in fitness culture. In reality, I was avoiding something much deeper than physical activity. I was avoiding discomfort. I was avoiding discipline. And perhaps most importantly, I was avoiding the possibility of failure. Everything changed one evening when I caught my reflection in a shop window. It wasn't that I looked dramatically different. It wasn't even about weight. It was the expression on my face that startled me. I looked tired. Not just physically exhausted, but mentally drained, as if I had been living on autopilot for years. That moment forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. I had neglected myself. My work had become my identity. My routine consisted of long hours at a desk, quick meals, and endless scrolling on my phone before bed. I kept telling myself that I would start taking care of myself next month, then next year. Eventually. But eventually never comes unless you make it come. The following week, without overthinking it, I walked into a gym near my apartment. The smell of rubber mats and disinfectant hit me immediately. The rhythmic sound of weights dropping and machines moving created a strange kind of harmony. People were lifting, running, stretching, each person focused on their own progress. I felt completely out of place. Everyone seemed confident, strong, and experienced. I stood near the entrance pretending to read a poster about membership options while secretly observing the room. I was convinced that people could immediately tell I didn't belong there. That thought, of course, was irrational, but insecurity rarely listens to logic. A receptionist approached me with a friendly smile. "First time here?" she asked. I nodded. Instead of feeling judged, I felt strangely relieved. She explained the different membership plans and offered a free introductory session with a trainer. My instinct was to refuse. I didn't want someone watching me struggle, but something inside me whispered, "If you're going to do this, do it properly." So I agreed. 2 days later, I met Daniel, the trainer assigned to me. He wasn't overly muscular in an intimidating way, but he carried himself with quiet confidence. He asked me about my goals. That question caught me off guard. Goals. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I simply wanted to feel better. But what did that mean exactly? Lose weight? Gain strength? Reduce stress? "I want to feel in control again," I finally said. He didn't laugh. He didn't look confused. He simply nodded. "That's a good place to start," he replied. The first workout was humbling. I underestimated how weak I had become. Simple exercises left me breathless. My muscles trembled under minimal weight. At one point, I considered pretending to feel dizzy just so I could sit down. But Daniel adjusted the exercises without making me feel embarrassed. He emphasized consistency over intensity. "You don't need to impress anyone," he said. "You just need to show up." That sentence stayed with me long after the session ended. The next morning I could barely move. My body protested every step I took. Yet beneath the soreness there was something unfamiliar. Pride. For the first time in a long while, I had done something difficult on purpose. As the weeks passed, I began to notice subtle changes. Not dramatic physical transformations, but mental ones. My posture improved. I felt slightly more alert during the day. I started sleeping better. More importantly, I stopped seeing the gym as a punishment. It became a laboratory for self-discipline. Every repetition required focus. Every set demanded patience. Progress was slow, sometimes almost invisible, but it was measurable, tangible. Outside the gym, my mindset began to shift as well. When faced with challenges at work, I found myself thinking, if I can push through that final set, I can push through this meeting. Physical training was quietly reshaping my resilience. However, not everything was smooth. There were days when motivation disappeared completely, rainy mornings when my bed felt warmer than any ambition, evenings when work left me mentally exhausted. On those days, the internal debate was intense. You can skip today. One day won't matter. But deep down, I knew that discipline is built precisely on the days you don't feel like showing up. So I made a rule. I didn't have to perform perfectly, but I had to walk through the door. Sometimes I would go to the gym and complete only half my planned workout. But I went. And that consistency slowly built confidence. Around the third month, something shifted. I caught my reflection again, this time in the gym mirror. My body hadn't transformed into something extraordinary, but my expression had changed. My shoulders were relaxed yet strong. My gaze was steady. I didn't look drained anymore. I looked present. That realization surprised me. I had joined the gym expecting physical improvement. Instead, I discovered psychological strength. The gym became more than a place with machines and weights. It became a space where excuses lost their power, where effort was visible, where progress, no matter how small, was undeniable. One evening, after finishing a particularly challenging workout, Daniel asked me, "Do you remember your first session?" I laughed. "Unfortunately, yes." "You couldn't finish 3 rounds," he reminded me gently. "Today, you did 5. I hadn't even noticed. That's the paradox of growth. It happens gradually, quietly, almost invisibly, until one day you realize you are no longer the person who walked in months ago. Joining the gym didn't solve all my problems. It didn't magically transform my life, but it restored something essential: agency. I stopped waiting for motivation. I started creating momentum. And perhaps that was the real transformation. By the 4th month, the gym had become part of my routine, but it had not yet become part of my identity. There is a difference. A routine is something you do. An identity is something you believe you are. I was still in between. I showed up consistently. I followed my program. I increased the weights gradually. On the surface, I was progressing, but internally, I still carried the old narrative about myself. The one that said I lacked discipline, that I would eventually quit, that this phase would fade like all the others. That inner voice was persistent. It didn't shout, it whispered. One evening, while attempting a heavier lift than usual, I failed. Not dramatically, not in a way that caused injury, but enough to feel the weight collapse back onto the rack before I completed the movement. A small failure, yet it felt symbolic. The old narrative returned instantly. "See? This is your limit." For a moment, I considered leaving early. I imagined walking out, blaming fatigue, work stress, poor sleep, anything external. But something unexpected happened. A woman from across the gym, someone I had seen many times but never spoken to, approached me. "Mind if I give you a tip?" she asked kindly. I hesitated, slightly embarrassed, but nodded. She adjusted my stance and explained how my balance was slightly off. It's not about strength, she said. It's about control. Control. That word echoed. I tried again. This time, the movement felt stable. Not easy, but intentional. The weight moved upward, slowly but steadily. When I finished, she smiled and walked back to her station without expecting gratitude or conversation. That brief interaction shifted something. Until then, I had seen the gym as a solitary battlefield, me versus my limitations. But in reality, it was a community of individuals quietly confronting their own weaknesses. Everyone there was struggling with something. In the following weeks, I became more observant. The men who always ran on the treadmill for exactly 40 minutes, rain or shine. The older woman who lifted lighter weights but never missed a session. The young student practicing boxing drills alone, repeating combinations with relentless focus. None of them were extraordinary in appearance, but they were consistent. And consistency is a quiet form of ambition. Around that time, work became overwhelming, deadlines multiplied, my responsibilities expanded. I found myself staying late at the office more often than usual. The temptation to skip the gym grew stronger. You deserve rest. You've done enough today. But I began to notice a pattern. On days when I skipped, my stress lingered. On days when I trained, even briefly, my mind felt clearer. Physical exertion became a form of mental recalibration. The gym was no longer about aesthetics. It was about stability. Then came an unexpected setback, a minor injury. Nothing dramatic, a strained shoulder from overtraining, but enough to force me to stop lifting for several weeks. At first, frustration dominated my thoughts. I feared regression. I feared losing momentum. I feared becoming the version of myself who quits when things become inconvenient. But Daniel offered a perspective I hadn't considered. Injuries aren't interruptions, he said. They're invitations to train differently. So instead of stopping entirely, I shifted my focus. Mobility work, core stability, light cardio, slower movements. The pace changed. And in that slower pace, I learned patience. Before, I had equated progress with intensity, heavier weights, faster runs, visible sweat. Now I began to understand sustainability. There is strength in restraint. During recovery, I spent more time observing my thoughts. Why had I attached so much of my self-worth to performance? Why did a missed lift feel like a personal failure? The gym was revealing patterns that extended far beyond physical exercise. I had always approached life with an all-or-nothing mentality. Either I excelled or I felt inadequate. Either I progressed quickly or I considered it stagnation. But muscles don't grow overnight, and neither does character. Gradually, my shoulder healed. I returned to heavier lifts, cautiously, with improved technique and greater awareness. This time, I wasn't chasing numbers. I was chasing mastery. The difference was subtle but transformative. Instead of asking, "How much can I lift?" I began asking, "How well can I move?" Instead of seeking validation through visible change, I began valuing internal consistency. One evening, as I finished a workout, I realized something unexpected. I was no longer comparing myself to others. In the early months, I had measured my worth against the strongest person in the room. Now, I measured it against yesterday's version of myself. That shift felt liberating. Growth became personal, quiet, independent. The gym, which once intimidated me, had become a mirror. It reflected not only my physical posture, but my mental habits, my impatience, my fear of failure, my tendency toward self-criticism. And slowly, through repetition and reflection, those habits began to change. Not perfectly, but noticeably. One evening, Daniel asked me again about my goal. Months earlier, I had said, "I want to feel in control again." He smiled. "Do you?" he asked. I paused. The answer was no longer theoretical. "Yes," I said. Not because my life had become simpler, not because challenges had disappeared, but because I had learned that control isn't about eliminating difficulty. It's about choosing your response to it. The gym had taught me something profound. Strength is not merely the ability to lift weight. It is the willingness to confront resistance repeatedly. And resistance exists everywhere. In muscles, in careers, in relationships, in personal doubts. The question is not whether it exists. The question is whether you show up anyway. 6 months after I joined the gym, something happened that had nothing to do with weights, mirrors, or physical transformation. My father was hospitalized. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious enough to shake our family. For years, he had neglected his health, always saying he would deal with it later. Watching him lie in that hospital bed, exhausted and vulnerable, forced me to confront a deeper layer of what strength truly means. For the first time, the gym was not just about me. It became symbolic. I remembered the version of myself who had postponed change indefinitely. The one who believed that there would always be another opportunity to start tomorrow. My father had lived that way too, postponing doctor visits, postponing lifestyle changes, postponing responsibility toward his own body. Now later had arrived. Sitting beside him in the hospital room, I felt a strange mix of gratitude and discomfort. Gratitude because I had chosen differently months earlier. Discomfort because I realized how easily I could have ended up in the same cycle of avoidance. When he asked me how I had been, I hesitated. Talking about gym sessions and personal growth felt trivial compared to IV tubes and medical monitors. But he insisted. So I told him everything. I told him about the first humiliating workout, about the failed lift, about the injury, about learning patience. He listened quietly. After a moment, he said something I didn't expect. "I wish I had learned that earlier," he admitted. "That discipline isn't punishment. It's protection." Protection. That word stayed with me long after I left the hospital. The gym had stopped being about appearance months ago. Now it became about longevity, about the future, about building a body and mindset capable of enduring stress. When I returned to training that week, my perspective had shifted once again. Every repetition felt purposeful. Every breath under pressure felt like preparation, not for a competition, but for life. Around that time, I encountered another internal challenge: comfort. Ironically, as I grew stronger and more consistent, the gym began to feel easy. Not physically easy, but mentally predictable. I knew the routines. I knew my limits. I knew what to expect. Growth, however, rarely occurs inside comfort. One evening, Daniel suggested something radical. "You've built a foundation," he said. "Now you need to test it." He proposed that I participate in a local fitness challenge. Nothing extreme, but demanding enough to push me beyond my perceived limits. My immediate reaction was resistance. I wasn't an athlete. I wasn't competitive. I didn't need public validation. But deep down, I knew my refusal was rooted in fear. Fear of failure in front of others, fear of exposing weakness, fear of discovering that I was still ordinary. After several days of reflection, I agreed. Training intensified. Workouts became structured around measurable performance. Endurance sessions grew longer. Strength sessions demanded sharper focus. Fatigue accumulated. There were mornings when my body felt heavy and uncooperative. Nights when I questioned why I had signed up in the first place. Yet something interesting happened. Instead of doubting my identity, I began to rely on it. I was no longer someone who tries to be disciplined. I was disciplined. That internal shift, subtle but powerful, changed the way I approached discomfort. The day of the challenge arrived. Standing among dozens of participants, I felt the old insecurity return briefly. Some competitors looked exceptionally fit. Others carried an air of effortless confidence. But this time, comparison did not dominate my thoughts. Preparation did. When the first event began, my heart pounded not with fear, but anticipation. Each station tested a different capacity: endurance, strength, coordination, resilience. There were moments when quitting would have been easier, when my muscles trembled and my breath felt insufficient, when doubt whispered familiar phrases. But I had heard those whispers before, and I had trained through them. I didn't win. I didn't place near the top, but I finished. And crossing that final line produced an emotion more powerful than victory: clarity. I understood that the gym had never been about transformation into someone extraordinary. It had been about reconciliation with myself. I had spent years negotiating with my own potential, promising to start later, to improve eventually, to prioritize myself someday. Joining the gym had interrupted that negotiation. It had forced me to act before I felt fully ready. Months after the challenge, my father began making changes of his own. He started walking daily. He modified his diet. He even asked about my training program. "You don't need a gym to begin," I told him. "You just need to begin." And perhaps that was the most important lesson of all. Strength is cumulative. It builds through repeated decisions, small, often unremarkable decisions, made consistently over time. Looking back, I realized the most profound transformation wasn't visible in muscle definition or posture. It was visible in my response to adversity. Before, I avoided resistance. Now I approached it. Before, I postponed growth. Now I initiated it. Before, I relied on motivation. Now I relied on discipline. The gym remains part of my routine. But more importantly, it has become part of my philosophy. When life becomes heavy, I no longer ask, "Why is this happening to me?" I ask, "How can I carry this?" And that shift, from avoidance to ownership, is perhaps the strongest muscle I've ever built. Now play the story again. Pause after each sentence and repeat it out loud. This is the shadowing technique. It helps you speak more fluently and confidently. If you enjoyed the story, like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone learning English. See you in the next story.